How you doing, everyone? Greetings and welcome to 8 Bits in the Basement for this part 3 of my Philips C52 suite of videos. So in the first episode what we did was we unboxed it and we had a look at it. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't all that impressed. The video on screen was crap. The game that I had with it, the one game I could play with, was 2-player and looked to be fairly bad, or at least not all that great. And the joysticks weren't working properly. So in part 2 I set to improving the quality of the video signal, and I made myself a little red, green, blue synchronous board to replace this guy. The CCAM RF modulator that was inside in the unit, the thing that was responsible for a signal that was hard to tune in and not really great quality. And that went quite well, apart from one thing. When I had finished, the colours on screen were wrong. Anything that was supposed to be black was green, and many of the other colours were all swapped around too. And as it comes down to it, it was a very simple fix, and the problem was created by me. When I went and made that board, I ended up leaving one dry joint where I think it was the green or the blue was going into that board from this system, and I pretty much ended up with just red and green going through to my green signal feed. So the colors were screwed up on it. So that was easy enough fix. Now, one of the joysticks miraculously repaired itself. Just by fooling around with it, it started working pretty much overnight. The other joystick, however, wasn't working properly. So I decided to open it up and have a little look and see what made it tick. So roll the tape on that, Peter. One of the joysticks here came back working miraculously, as if by magic, and the other one was still on working. So what I decided to do was to open up the one that wasn't working and see what the story was. So these guys here, anyway, they're held together with 2 screws here at the back, and the screws are like that. They're just little Phillips screws, and when they come out, they will let you open up this little shell that the joystick is in. So here we go. So the joystick is very, very simple construction. It is a regular little digital joystick. And on this side here, you've got your button, which is just a little plunger here that pushes against the mylar, because this is mylar like you'd find in a keyboard, here to activate a fire, or a fire command. Fire command, fire, and it'll fire. The other thing is that you've got your left, right, up and down. But this is like a very over-engineered kind of complicated setup, because in order to open this, now I haven't opened it at all, but in order to open it, what you have to do is remove this top knob, which pretty much comes off like this. And then in order to remove this bar, because it's very, very well kept in, and it needs to be, this whole section here needs to be removed to get at the mylar. And the way that it's done is, you'll see pushing this way lets you move it like that on the spring, but what you actually need to do is you need to hold this section, push down on this plastic section, and you'll see there's what they call a quick release nut, I think it's called. And what you need to do is you need to deform that ever so slightly, and it'll come off, and then you'll be able to remove this plastic part and also the spring and this bottom plastic part, and remove this whole bar out this way. Then you can take up your mylar and you can work on that. However, again, I was quite lucky, because when I was looking at this to try and figure out how the heck to open it, I removed this here from the mylar, which is the where the cable connects actually into the mylar itself. And these things are very, very fragile the way they're made. You'll see it's just, the mylar just has this kind of a finger connection thing that plugs into this guy here on the cable. And actually, believe it or not, without opening anything or without doing anything, it was enough for me to remove this and pop it back in. I didn't use contact cleaner or anything. I just looked at it. I said, I'll leave that for another day. I put it back together, and when I tried it, everything worked perfectly. So I think there was just a little, I don't know, over the years or whatever, some kind of gunk or something had built up on this, and it seems to be working away fine now. So I didn't actually open any of this, and that's why it's still very dirty, but it's working fine. I'm not going to go next or near it until it stops working maybe, and then we'll look at cleaning it properly. But that's that. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So pretty much the 2 joysticks kind of repaired themselves. And now I've got 2 working joysticks, so there's not a whole lot that I can really show you any more than that. So there you go, on to the next part of the video. So I think you'll agree that went exceptionally well. I like these fixes where you don't really have to do much. Just open them up, look at them, and voila, it works. Absolutely perfect. So I had my system with my video output working very, very well, and both my joysticks now working absolutely perfectly, or well, as good as they can without being cleaned all that much. But then it occurred to me that all I had was a 2-player game and a programming language. And to enjoy a video game, really, if you're just one player, you need to be playing a 1-player game. So the next logical step was to buy myself a cheap cartridge and try out a 1-player game. However, kind of stupid as it was, the cheapest cartridge I could find was another 2-player game. But I took it anyway with the hopes of creating a multicart. And that's what I did. So I'll pretty much show you what I did with that cartridge. Roll it again, Peter, and show these people. Okay, so I managed to get my Philips C52 working. We've got a working system, but all I've got are two-player games that aren't 100% brilliant because you have to have somebody else to play the games with you, and I don't have any friends. So what I needed to do for myself was create myself a little multicart. Now, multicarts I've done before. I've done one for the old Atari 2600, and actually this follows exactly the same thing. So I decided, without any real instructions or anything, using what I had learned from the Atari, to try and make a multicart, and guess what, it works exactly the same. So I bought myself a cheap video pack cartridge, and what I managed to get myself was electronic ice hockey and electronic soccer, which are two variations of one game, in a very hard plastic shell. And the shell is held together with two big fat Phillips screws like this. So those Phillips screws are hidden under this little label here. So just pull up the label, pull out the screws, and you'll be able to open the cart. And inside in the cartridge you will find not everything you see here, but this bottom portion, which is the PCB. And this particular game lives on this little 2 kilobyte ROM chip. Now this ROM chip has the same pinout as a 27C16, and I'm going to put the pinout for 27C16 there. And that's what it looks like. And what you want to do is you want to actually populate where this fella lived with a larger ROM chip. So what I did was I took myself a 27C1000 ROM chip, which is a 128 kilobyte chip, which its pinout looks like that. Now, so what we want to do is we want to correlate, just to use a large word, we want to correlate which pin corresponds to which pin on the two chips. And what we can do then is we can join the corresponding pins on this big guy here to where they would go on this PCB. And then any of the address lines we have left over, we route them through to a dip switch here so that we can pull them to ground or provide 5 volts to them and pretty much turn the addresses on and off. And that is how we can choose between different banks on this big chip here, because this guy here is 128 kilobytes big, which means that if we cut it into 2 kilobyte banks, we've got enough room to store 64 2 kilobyte games. So 64 of these type games can fit onto this chip here. That is basically how this whole thing goes together and how it works. There's not a whole lot more to it. It really is joining the dots. I mean, what you're doing is you're figuring out where all the data lines go. There's only 8 data lines. You're figuring out where the address lines go. Now, you'll have more address lines the bigger your chip is. So the bigger this chip you're putting in is, the more address lines you'll have. So you put what address lines you can in here, and any of the remaining ones you loop out to your switch here, and that'll determine how many banks you have. After that, you've got your 5 volts, you've got your ground, you've got your chip enable line and all those kind of things, but you'll see they correspond from one chip to the other, and you're just joining them in here. And that is basically that. Once you've programmed up your large chip and slipped it in there, you can pick whatever games you want and you can play them. And yeah, actually it was a lot easier than I thought it would be, because that's one of the things about these 8-bit systems. You can learn a lot from them because they are quite simple. Well, I mean, they're not. They're not simple at all. They can be very complicated, but in some ways they can be very simple. And now I'm rambling on, so let's go on to the next part of this video. So here I am with my little multi-cart capable of playing all kinds of games. And you'll see that now I've got some one-player games that aren't too bad actually. Look at that, it's great when you plug it in, it goes all spawaways. But here we are. This here is a little one-player game, which is what I was looking for, a kind of a Space Invader. Well, it's not really Space Invaders, I suppose kind of Galaxians type thing. But there are a number of games on this system that are actually very, very good. And it's changed my mind on the system altogether. With this cartridge here, what I was talking about there when I showed it to you were all 2 kilobyte games. But there are 4 and 8 kilobyte games available for this. Now to get larger games to work on the likes of the Atari, it's kind of complicated because there's bank switching and you need extra chips inside in the cartridge and all that kind of stuff. But with this little system here, any bank switching that's done is done on the actual console itself. So there are extra address lines available through the console if you're using larger capacity ROMs. So what I didn't explain in that little segment that I just showed you was I added on an extra switch so that I could switch between 2 kilobyte and 4 kilobyte games, and I'm going to add on another switch again so that I can switch between 4 and 8 kilobyte games. Now it gets a little complicated and I don't want this video to be very, very long. So what I decided I'd do, if it interests you and if you want to try and make one of these things, I'm going to prepare a little instructable on it, and what I will do when that's ready and it's online is I'll put the link to it in the description below. So if that interests you, check back here in about a week's time. You should find the link to that instructable and you'll be able to build one of these cartridges yourself for your C52, including bank switching for 2 kilobyte, 4 kilobyte and 8 kilobyte games, because there are a little gymnastics that need to be performed when you're programming your ROM chip so that you can have the games together in the right orders so that they don't mess each other up when you're doing your bank switching. But that's pretty much it. The Philips C52, I've had my mind completely changed on it. To be honest, when I took it out of the box and powered it on first, I thought it was a pile of crap. I said there is no doubt in my mind as to why this thing failed in the face of the Atari 2600 at the time. But having played many of the games available on the system, I'm now actually surprised that it doesn't have a larger place in history. Some of the games available for it are actually very, very good. They're very playable. So much so that I've decided I'm going to create a short little video going through some of the games on it and just kind of an overview of the games in general rather than a kind of review or anything. So if that interests you, keep an eye out for it. Apart from that, if you enjoyed the old video, as usual, if you haven't done so already, think of clicking the subscribe thingy, that'd be great. Give us an old thumbs up. Equally, if you didn't like the video, click on that thumbs down one. Leave a comment. I'll answer any comments that I get. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. Thanks very much for all your support. Really appreciate it. It means an awful lot to me. And remember, I'll be waiting for you down here in the basement. See you all soon. Bye-bye.